The Unbreakable Hustle, From Teenage Dreams to Real Estate Reality. Chapter 1. The Spark. The notification sound from Marcus's laptop cut through the silence of his bedroom at 2:47 a.m. Another failed dropshipping order. Another customer demanding a refund. Another sleepless night ahead. At 15, while his classmates were worried about algebra tests and weekend parties, Marcus Chun was staring at his computer screen, watching his third business venture crumble in real time. The glow from the monitor illuminated the dark circles under his eyes, badges of honor in his relentless pursuit of something bigger than the suburban life mapped out for him. Just one more hour, he whispered to himself, the same lie he'd been telling for the past 3 hours. His parents had long since given up trying to convince him to get a normal, teenage job at the local grocery store. They'd learned that arguing with Marcus about his entrepreneurial obsessions was like trying to stop a river with bare hands. The dropshipping business had seemed foolproof 6 months ago. Buy cheap products from overseas suppliers, mark them up, sell them to eager customers who didn't know better. What could go wrong? Everything, as it turned out. Shipping delays, quality issues, supplier problems, customer complaints. It was a masterclass in how many ways a simple business model could implode. But Marcus wasn't thinking about failure as he scrolled through angry customer emails. He was thinking about the next move, the next angle, the next opportunity. Failure wasn't the end of the story. It was just expensive education. His phone buzzed with a text from his best friend Jake. "Dude, it's almost 3 a.m. Are you seriously still working on that thing?" Marcus typed back quickly. "This thing is going to change everything. You'll see." He had no idea how right he would be, though not in the way he imagined. Chapter 2. The School of Hard Knocks. 6 months later, the dropshipping business was officially dead, buried alongside Marcus's first 2 ventures, a lawn care service that collapsed when he realized he was allergic to grass, and a tutoring business that failed when he discovered he couldn't teach math to save his life. But Marcus wasn't dwelling on the failures. He was already 3 weeks deep into his next obsession: event planning. Local Event Solutions read the business cards he'd ordered with money from his part-time job at a coffee shop. The cards were expensive, probably too expensive for a 16-year-old with a track record of spectacular failures, but Marcus believed in the power of looking professional. The event planning business started promisingly enough. Marcus landed his first client through a family connection. His aunt's friend needed help organizing a birthday party for her daughter. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. What Marcus lacked in experience, he made up for in enthusiasm. He spent weeks researching vendors, comparing prices, creating detailed timelines. He was determined to deliver something extraordinary. The party was a disaster. The bounce house company showed up 3 hours late. The catering was wrong. The client had specifically requested vegan options, but Marcus had somehow ordered regular sandwiches. The DJ canceled last minute because of a family emergency that looked suspiciously like a better-paying gig. As 12-year-old guests ran around a deflated bounce house eating ham sandwiches they couldn't eat, Marcus stood in the middle of the chaos, feeling like the world's youngest failure. "I'm so sorry," he kept repeating to his aunt's friend, who was trying her best to salvage her daughter's special day. "I'll refund everything. I'll figure this out." The woman was kind about it, but Marcus could see the disappointment in her eyes. Worse, he could see pity. That night, Marcus sat in his bedroom, surrounded by event planning books and vendor contracts. His laptop was open to a spreadsheet tracking his losses: $800 in refunds, $300 in wasted supplies, $200 in business cards for a business that was effectively over. For the first time since starting his entrepreneurial journey, Marcus wondered if everyone else was right. Maybe he should just focus on school, get good grades, go to college, get a safe job. Maybe this whole entrepreneur thing was just a fantasy. But then his phone rang. It was Mrs. Patterson, the woman whose daughter's party he'd ruined. "Marcus," she said, "I know today didn't go as planned, but I wanted you to know something. My daughter had a great time anyway. Kids are resilient like that." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "Mrs. Patterson, I'm really—" "Let me finish," she interrupted gently. "What impressed me wasn't that everything went perfect. What impressed me was how you handled it when things went wrong. You didn't make excuses. You didn't blame the vendors. You took responsibility and tried to fix it. That's rare, especially in someone your age. Marcus stared at his ceiling, not trusting his voice. I think you're going to be very successful someday, Mrs. Patterson continued. Maybe not in event planning, but in something. You've got something special. Don't let one bad day convince you otherwise. After she hung up, Marcus closed his laptop and went to bed. But for the first time in weeks, he wasn't planning his next business move. He was thinking about what Mrs. Patterson had said about taking responsibility, about not making excuses. He didn't know it yet, but this conversation would become the foundation of everything that came after. Chapter 3. The Wandering Years. The next 2 years were a blur of false starts and expensive lessons. Marcus tried drop servicing, failed when he couldn't deliver on promises, social media marketing, failed when he realized he hated social media, affiliate marketing, failed when he got caught up in pyramid schemes masquerading as legitimate businesses, and even a brief, embarrassing stint trying to become a teenage life coach failed spectacularly when he realized he had no life experience to coach anyone about. Each failure carved away pieces of his teenage arrogance, replacing them with something more valuable: wisdom. Marcus was learning to spot red flags, to ask better questions, to research more thoroughly. He was building what he didn't know was one of his most valuable assets: the ability to fail fast and move on faster. By his senior year of high school, Marcus had accumulated more business failures than most adults attempt in a lifetime. His classmates had largely stopped asking about his projects, and his teachers had stopped suggesting he focus more on his studies. Even his parents had entered a kind of resigned acceptance, like parents of a child who keeps bringing home stray animals. But Marcus had learned something crucial during those wandering years. He was unemployable in the traditional sense. Not because he lacked skills or intelligence, but because he'd tasted the possibility of building something from nothing. The idea of working for someone else, of trading his time for fixed salary, felt like imprisonment. This realization both terrified and motivated him. If he couldn't work for someone else, he had to make this entrepreneur thing work. There was no backup plan because he'd psychologically eliminated all other options. The breakthrough came, as breakthroughs often do, from an unexpected direction. Marcus was working his last day at the coffee shop before graduation when he overheard a conversation between two customers. One was complaining about trying to find a good rental property as an investment, and the other was explaining how he'd made a fortune in real estate but had gotten out of the market because it was too much work. Something clicked. That evening, Marcus didn't research a new business idea or scheme about his next venture. Instead, he went to the library and checked out every book on real estate investing he could find. He spent the entire night reading, taking notes, making connections. Real estate wasn't sexy like some of his previous ventures. It wasn't a get-rich-quick scheme or a trendy new business model. It was old, established, boring. And that, Marcus realized, might be exactly what he needed. Chapter 4. The Foundation. The first real estate book Marcus read was Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. It wasn't the most technical book, but it fundamentally changed how he thought about money, assets, and building wealth. For the first time, Marcus saw a clear path from where he was to where he wanted to be. But knowledge without action is just entertainment, and Marcus had learned through painful experience that jumping into a new business without proper preparation was a recipe for disaster. So he spent the next 6 months not trying to buy property, but studying. He read everything: books, blogs, forums, case studies. He listened to podcasts during his commute to community college. He'd enrolled to buy time while figuring out his next move. He attended local real estate investment group meetings, where he was inevitably the youngest person in the room by at least 20 years. At those meetings, Marcus didn't try to be the smartest person in the room. He'd learned from his previous failures that his ego was not his friend. Instead, he listened. He asked questions. He took notes. He bought coffee for experienced investors and picked their brains about their biggest mistakes. The key, one grizzled investor named Frank told him over coffee after meeting, is to start small and learn the business before you try to get fancy. Most people want to skip the fundamentals and go straight to the big deals. That's how you lose your shirt. Marcus nodded, scribbling notes. What would you recommend for someone just starting out? Frank stirred his coffee thoughtfully. Wholesaling. Find properties under contract, assign the contract to an investor, make a fee. You don't need money, just hustle and the ability to analyze deals. It'll teach you the market, how to spot deals, how to work with sellers and buyers. That conversation changed everything. Wholesaling wasn't glamorous. It was essentially being a middleman between motivated sellers and cash investors. But it was a way to get into real estate without money, and more importantly, it was a way to learn the business while making money instead of losing it. Marcus spent the next month studying wholesaling specifically. He learned about finding distressed properties, analyzing deals, building a buyer's list, and the legal aspects of contract assignment. He practiced his numbers on paper deals until he could analyze a property's potential in minutes. Then, on a crisp October morning, Marcus made his first cold call to a homeowner who'd been trying to sell their property for 6 months. His hands were shaking as he dialed. All his previous business failures flashed through his mind. What if this was just another expensive mistake? But when the homeowner answered, Marcus took a deep breath and started asking questions. 2 weeks later, he closed his first wholesale deal and made $3,000. Chapter 5. The Momentum. The first deal was a fluke, Marcus told himself. The seller was motivated, the property was obviously undervalued, and he'd gotten lucky with his buyer. It couldn't possibly be this straightforward. The second deal proved him wrong. Then the third. Then the fourth. By spring, Marcus was averaging one wholesale deal per month, earning between $2,000 and $5,000 per deal. It wasn't life-changing money yet, but it was consistent income from his own business, something he'd never achieved despite years of trying. More importantly, Marcus was learning the real estate business from the ground up. He was developing an eye for value, understanding local market trends, building relationships with contractors, investors, and real estate agents. He was creating what he'd never had before, a solid foundation. But Marcus had learned from his previous failures not to get complacent. Success could disappear as quickly as it appeared if he didn't continue evolving. He started attending more advanced real estate seminars, connecting with bigger investors, studying different strategies. He learned about fix and flip deals, buy and hold rentals, commercial properties. Each new strategy was a piece of a larger puzzle he was still assembling. The breakthrough came when Marcus met Sarah Martinez at a real estate conference in Dallas. Sarah was a 30-something investor who'd built a portfolio of rental properties that generated over $50,000 per month in passive income. Wholesaling is great for learning and generating quick cash, Sarah told him over dinner, but if you want to build real wealth, you need to start keeping some properties. The real money in real estate is in the monthly cash flow and long-term appreciation. Marcus had been thinking the same thing, but hearing it from someone who'd actually done it made the path clearer. But I don't have the money for down payments on multiple properties, he said. Sarah smiled. That's the beauty of being a good wholesaler. You're already finding great deals. Instead of assigning every contract, start keeping the best ones. Use your wholesale profits as down payments. Partner with other investors who have money but don't have your deal-finding skills. That conversation planted a seed that would change everything. Over the next few months, Marcus started being more selective about his deals. Instead of wholesaling every property he got under contract, he began keeping the best ones for himself. He used his wholesale profits to fund down payments and partnered with other investors who provided additional capital in exchange for a share of the profits. His monthly income started growing exponentially. $5,000 became $8,000. $8,000 became $12,000. By the end of his first full year in real estate, Marcus was averaging over $15,000 per month. But he was just getting started. Chapter 6. The Scale. The transition from wholesaling to building a rental portfolio wasn't seamless. Marcus discovered that being a landlord involved a completely different skill set than finding and flipping contracts. Tenant screening, property management, maintenance coordination, rent collection. Each aspect required its own learning curve. His first rental property was a disaster that nearly convinced him to stick with wholesaling forever. The tenant seemed perfect on paper, steady job, good credit, excellent references. But 3 months after moving in, they stopped paying rent and turned the property into what Marcus could only describe as a crack house light. When he finally got them evicted, the property needed $8,000 in repairs. "This is why most people quit," Frank, his mentor from the real estate meetings, told him as they surveyed the damage. Real estate investing isn't just about finding good deals. It's about managing all the moving pieces that come after the deal. Marcus stood in the middle of his trashed property, looking at holes in the walls and mysterious stains on the carpet. A year ago, this might have been enough to make him quit and find a new business to chase. But something had changed. The failures from his teenage years had taught him that setbacks were just part of the process, not the end of the story. "So, what would you do differently?" Marcus asked Frank. "Better tenant screening for one. Property management company for another, at least until you learn the ropes. And always have reserves for repairs and vacancies. This business is profitable long-term, but it'll kill you short-term if you're undercapitalized." Marcus took Frank's advice to heart. He hired a property management company for his existing rental and implemented much stricter screening criteria for future tenants. He also started setting aside 30% of his wholesale profits as reserves for his rental properties, money that would sit in savings earning nothing but would be there when things went wrong. And things went wrong regularly. Water heaters failed, roofs leaked, tenants moved out unexpectedly. But now Marcus was prepared for these setbacks instead of being blindsided by them. The business started stabilizing. His rental income grew more predictable as he learned to choose better tenants and maintain his properties proactively instead of reactively. His wholesale business continued growing as his reputation spread and his network expanded. By month 18, Marcus hit his first major milestone, $20,000 in monthly income. But hitting $20,000 per month revealed a new challenge Marcus hadn't anticipated: himself. Chapter 7. The Ceiling. The problem with success, Marcus discovered, was that it made you think you were smarter than you actually were. At $20,000 per month, Marcus felt invincible. He'd gone from teenage failure to successful young entrepreneur in less than 2 years. He started making decisions faster, taking bigger risks, trusting his gut over his spreadsheets. For a few months, it worked. His income pushed toward $25,000 per month as he closed bigger wholesale deals and acquired more rental properties. Marcus started thinking about buying a new car, moving out of his parents' house, maybe even writing a book about his success. Then reality crashed into his overconfidence. It started with a wholesale deal that seemed too good to be true, which Marcus learned too late meant it probably was. The seller was motivated, the numbers looked great, and Marcus had a buyer ready to close quickly. He got the property under contract and assigned it to his buyer without doing his usual thorough due diligence. The buyer discovered structural issues during their inspection that made the property worth significantly less than Marcus had calculated. They backed out of the deal, leaving Marcus stuck with a contract on a property he couldn't afford to buy and couldn't assign to anyone else. Marcus lost $5,000 in earnest money and spent 2 weeks scrambling to find another buyer who would take the property with its problems. He eventually found one, but only by cutting his assignment fee to almost nothing. Around the same time, 3 of his rental properties had major issues in the same month: a roof replacement, a plumbing emergency, and a tenant who destroyed the property before disappearing in the middle of the night. By the end of that month, Marcus's income had dropped to $12,000, still good money, but a painful reminder that success could evaporate quickly if he got sloppy. He spent a weekend reviewing every mistake, every shortcut he'd taken, every assumption he'd made. The pattern was clear. His recent failures all stemmed from the same root cause. He'd started believing his own hype and stopped doing the fundamental work that had made him successful in the first place. Marcus called Frank and asked if they could meet for coffee. "I think I'm starting to understand why most people don't make it in this business," Marcus said, stirring his coffee and avoiding eye contact. Frank chuckled. "Hit the ceiling, did you? How did you know?" "Because everyone hits it. The first ceiling is usually around where you are now when you start making real money and think you figured it all out. Some people quit when they hit it. Others learn from it and break through to the next level." Marcus looked up. "What's the difference?" "The people who break through realize that success isn't about being smart enough to avoid mistakes. It's about being humble enough to keep learning from them." That conversation marked the beginning of Marcus's real education in business. Chapter 8. The Education. Instead of trying to immediately bounce back from his setbacks, Marcus did something that went against every entrepreneurial instinct he'd developed. He slowed down. He spent the next month not pursuing new deals, but analyzing his existing business. He created detailed systems for every aspect of his operations: how he evaluated wholesale deals, how he screened tenants, how he managed cash flow, how he handled maintenance issues. More importantly, he started tracking his mistakes as carefully as he tracked his successes. He created what he called his failure file, a detailed record of every deal that went wrong, every decision that backfired, every assumption that proved incorrect. The patterns were illuminating. Most of his mistakes fell into three categories: rushing due diligence because he was excited about a deal, cutting corners on tenant screening because he needed to fill a vacancy quickly, and making financial decisions based on best-case scenarios instead of realistic projections. Armed with this self-awareness, Marcus began rebuilding his business with better systems and stricter standards. He turned down deals that a few months earlier would have seemed exciting but now triggered his newly developed risk sensors. He let rental properties sit vacant for weeks until he found tenants who met his criteria instead of rushing to fill them with whoever applied first. The short-term result was lower income. His monthly earnings stayed in the $15,000 to $18,000 range for several months. But the foundation he was building was much stronger. Marcus also started investing heavily in his education. He joined mastermind groups with other successful real estate investors, hired business coaches who specialized in scaling real estate businesses, and attended every conference and seminar he could afford. At one conference, he met David Kim, an investor who'd built a real estate business generating over $100,000 per month. David's presentation was about systems and scalability, how to build a business that could grow without requiring you to work more hours. After the presentation, Marcus approached David with a question that had been nagging him. "How do you know when you're ready to scale bigger? I feel like every time I try to grow faster, I make mistakes that set me back." David studied Marcus for a moment. "How long have you been in business?" "About 2 years." "And what's your monthly income?" "Between $15,000 and $20,000, depending on the month." David nodded. "You're in the Valley of Death." "The what?" "The Valley of Death. It's where most entrepreneurs get stuck between their initial success and real scalability. You're making too much money to quit, but not enough to hire the people and systems you need to grow to the next level. The temptation is to try to do everything yourself because you can't afford to hire help, but that keeps you stuck." Marcus felt like David was describing his exact situation. "So, how do you get out?" "You have to invest in the business before you can afford it. Hire people before you need them. Build systems before you're overwhelmed. It feels scary because you're spending money that could be profit, but it's the only way to break through to the next level." This conversation would prove to be the turning point in Marcus's business. Chapter 9. The Investment. Acting on David's advice was harder than Marcus had anticipated. Every instinct told him to maximize short-term profits, but David had convinced him that short-term thinking was exactly what kept most entrepreneurs stuck. Marcus's first major investment was hiring a virtual assistant to handle the administrative aspects of his wholesale business, managing leads, scheduling appointments, following up with buyers and sellers. It cost him $1,500 per month, money that had previously gone straight to his bottom line. For the first few weeks, Marcus questioned the decision daily. He could have done those tasks himself, and the virtual assistant made mistakes that Marcus had to correct. But gradually, something interesting happened. With the administrative work off his plate, Marcus had more time to focus on finding and analyzing deals. His deal flow increased by 40% within 2 months. Encouraged by this success, Marcus made his next investment, a property management company for his rental portfolio. At $100 per property per month, it was expensive, but it freed up huge amounts of his time and mental energy. Instead of fielding calls about leaky faucets and late rent payments, Marcus could focus on acquiring more properties. Instead of spending weekends showing apartments to prospective tenants, he could attend networking events and conferences. The third investment was the hardest. Marcus hired a business coach who specialized in scaling real estate businesses. At $2,000 per month, it was a substantial expense that made his accountant, his father, wince. But the coach, Jennifer Walsh, brought something Marcus hadn't realized he desperately needed: objective perspective. "Your business is solid," Jennifer told him during their first session, "but you're thinking too small. You're operating like someone who wants to make a comfortable living, not someone who wants to build significant wealth." Marcus bristled slightly. "I'm making $20,000 a month. That's not small." "It's not small," Jennifer agreed, "but it's not scalable either. You're still trading your time for money, just at a higher rate. If you got sick for a month, what would happen to your income?" Marcus hadn't considered this question, but the answer was uncomfortable. His business would largely stop because everything depended on him personally finding deals, managing relationships, and making decisions. "So, what would you recommend?" he asked. Jennifer smiled. "We're going to build you a real business. One that can operate and grow without you being involved in every decision." Over the next 6 months, Jennifer helped Marcus transform his operation from a one-man show to a legitimate business. They hired additional team members, created standard operating procedures for every aspect of the business, implemented customer relationship management software, and developed marketing systems that generated leads automatically instead of relying solely on Marcus's personal networking. The process was expensive and sometimes frustrating. Marcus's expenses increased faster than his income for several months, making his net profit temporarily lower than it had been before he started investing in growth. But by month 30 of his real estate career, the investments started paying off dramatically. Chapter 10: The Breakthrough. The breakthrough came suddenly, though in retrospect, Marcus could see it had been building for months. His wholesale business was now processing 3 times as many leads as he could have handled personally, thanks to his expanded team and better systems. His rental portfolio was growing faster because professional property management allowed him to focus on acquisitions instead of day-to-day operations. His deal analysis was more sophisticated because he'd invested in training and software that helped him evaluate opportunities more accurately. In month 31, Marcus's income hit $35,000. Month 32 brought $42,000. By month 36, he was consistently above $50,000 per month. But the real breakthrough wasn't financial, it was psychological. Marcus realized he'd built something that could operate without his constant involvement. He could take vacations without his income stopping. He could focus on strategy instead of tactics. He could think about opportunities instead of just surviving daily operations. At a real estate conference in Phoenix, Marcus ran into Sarah Martinez, the investor who'd first encouraged him to keep properties instead of wholesaling everything. "Marcus," she said, clearly pleased to see him. "How's the business going?" "Really well," Marcus replied, trying to sound modest. "I'm averaging about $50,000 a month now." Sarah's eyebrows rose.
Wow.
"That's incredible growth. What changed?" Marcus thought about the question seriously. "I stopped trying to do everything myself. I started investing in the business instead of just taking money out of it." "That's the difference between self-employment and entrepreneurship," Sarah said. Self-employed people buy themselves jobs. Entrepreneurs build assets that work without them. That evening, Marcus sat in his hotel room and reflected on how far he'd come. 3 years earlier, he'd been a teenager with a string of failed businesses and no clear direction. Now he was running a business that generated more income in a month than most people made in a year. But Marcus wasn't satisfied. The conversation with Sarah had reminded him of a goal he'd set but hadn't thought about seriously in months: reaching $100,000 per month. A year ago, that goal had seemed impossible, a fantasy number that successful entrepreneurs threw around, but that didn't apply to him. Now, with his systems in place and his team growing, it felt achievable. Marcus opened his laptop and started planning. Chapter 11: The Vision. Reaching $100,000 per month wasn't just about doubling his current income, Marcus realized. It required a fundamentally different approach to business. At $50,000 per month, Marcus could still be involved in most major decisions. At $100,000 per month, The business would need to operate more independently, with better systems, stronger leadership, and clearer processes. Marcus spent the next month studying businesses that had successfully scaled to that level. He read case studies, interviewed other entrepreneurs, and worked with Jennifer to develop a clear plan. The strategy had three components: diversify income streams, build stronger systems, and develop leadership within his team. For diversification, Marcus decided to expand beyond residential properties into commercial real estate. The deals were larger and more complex, but they also offered higher profit margins and less day-to-day management. For systems, Marcus invested in enterprise-level software for customer relationship management, financial tracking, and project management. He also created detailed training programs for his team and standardized processes for every aspect of the business. For leadership, Marcus promoted his most capable team members to management roles and hired experienced professionals for key positions. He learned to delegate not just tasks, but entire areas of responsibility. The process was challenging. Marcus had to overcome his perfectionist tendencies and trust others to make decisions that could significantly impact the business. He had to invest heavily in technology and training before seeing returns. He had to learn entirely new skills around leadership and strategic planning. But month by month, the results became clear. His income continued growing: $60,000, $75,000, $85,000 per month. More importantly, the quality of his life improved as he stepped back from day-to-day operations and focused on higher-level strategy. By month 42 of his real estate career, Marcus hit $100,000 in monthly income for the first time. Epilogue: the foundation. Standing in his new office, a proper office in a real building, not his childhood bedroom, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him here. The walls were decorated not with motivational posters, but with photos from closing deals, team celebrations, and conferences where he'd learned crucial lessons. On his desk was a framed photo from his first real estate meeting, where he'd been the youngest person in the room by 20 years. Next to it was a recent photo from a conference where he'd been one of the featured speakers, sharing his story with other aspiring entrepreneurs. The irony wasn't lost on him. The same qualities that had made him fail repeatedly as a teenager, impatience, overconfidence, reluctance to ask for help, were exactly what he'd had to overcome to succeed in real estate. His phone buzzed with a text from Jake, his friend who'd questioned his late-night work sessions years earlier. "Saw your interview in Real Estate Weekly. Pretty crazy to think this all started with you failing at dropshipping in high school." Marcus smiled and typed back, "The failures were the most important part. They taught me everything I needed to succeed." That evening, Marcus drove to his old coffee shop job, where he'd first overheard the conversation about real estate investing. The manager, Mrs. Chun, no relation, was still there and recognized him immediately. "Marcus, I heard you're doing very well for yourself." "I've been fortunate," Marcus replied, ordering his usual coffee. "Fortunate nothing," Mrs. Chun said firmly. "You worked harder than any teenager I ever employed. You were always reading business books on your breaks, always talking about your next project. Success like yours doesn't come from luck." As Marcus drove home, he thought about Mrs. Chen's words. Success hadn't come from luck, but it hadn't come from intelligence or natural talent either. It had come from persistence, humility, and an willingness to learn from failure. His phone rang with a call from a young entrepreneur who'd heard his story and wanted advice on getting started in real estate. As Marcus answered, he remembered Frank's generosity in mentoring him when he was just getting started. "The most important thing," Marcus told the caller, "is to start before you feel ready. You'll make mistakes, lots of them. But if you're humble enough to learn from them and persistent enough to keep going, you can build something extraordinary." After the call, Marcus sat in his car for a moment before heading inside. Tomorrow, his team would handle most of the day-to-day operations while he focused on strategic planning and new opportunities. He had meetings scheduled with commercial property developers, calls with investors interested in partnering on larger deals, and a presentation to give at a real estate conference next month. But tonight, Marcus was simply grateful. Grateful for the failures that had taught him resilience, the mentors who had shared their wisdom, and the persistence that had carried him through years of setbacks to this moment of success. He pulled into his driveway, his own driveway, for a house he'd bought with cash from his business, and smiled. The teenage dreamer who'd failed at dropshipping would hardly recognize the man he'd become, but every failure, every lesson, every small victory had been necessary to build the foundation for everything that came after. The hustle hadn't just been unbreakable, it had been transformative.